when I started looking at facial recognition technologies, it became very clear that these were surveillance technologies. And when you're thinking about facial recognition, these are covert surveillance technologies, right? And so with other biometrics, like say your fingerprint, it had to be cooperative. You generally know you've been fingerprinted. With your face, in the book I talk about stores that have mannequins with cameras in their eyes, right? Billboards that are literally watching you. And you might say, well, my phone is tracking me. You can leave your phone at home. It's a little harder to leave your face at home.
Still see me standing up. I just can't say goodbye. I'm in the corner watching you kiss her. Right over here. Why can't you see me? Giving it my all, but I'm not the girl you're taking home. Ooh, I keep dancing on my own. I keep dancing on my own. Ooh, ooh, I keep dancing on my own.
Hello, hello. Clap once if you hear me. Clap twice if you hear me. 3 times if you hear me. All right, welcome, welcome. We're gonna do some quick intros, and so we will start with Amanda.
Hi, I'm Amanda. Are we supposed to say who we are and what we do and why we're here and what we're excited about?
You're gonna plug your stuff.
Oh my, we start with the plugging?
Yes, start plugging.
That's backwards, I like it. My name is Amanda Palmer, and I'm a musician and a writer and a mom and a skeptical internet user nowadays. And this is my book. It's called The Art of Asking. It was based on a TED Talk I gave in 2013. And
Bestseller!
New York Times bestseller.
New York Times bestseller!
Needs a new foreword. Needs some serious updating and possible redacting. Because some shit happened in that book that I just don't agree with anymore. And then I haven't really plugged this very much, but it seems really important right now. I just, a few years ago, wrote the introduction for this book. It's called Handbook for a Post-Roe America. And it's a fun read. It's a little more important. I mean, it was important back when I did this 5 years ago, and now everything is incredibly scary. So this also kind of has a website that goes with it. As I'm sure you know, like the information about abortion care is getting updated minutely as people are losing their rights minutely. So I brought a couple copies of these. I don't know if Harvard Bookstore actually has these in stock, but if you're desperate for this book, I brought you one, and I'll trade you something for it. Or I'll just make you join my Patreon. And I just moved back to Boston in August, and I'm super happy to be home.
Hello, my name is Evan Greer. I am a queer and trans activist and writer and musician based here in Boston, and I'm also the director of Fight for the Future, which is a nonprofit, perhaps best known for helping organize some of the largest online protests in human history. But lately we've been trying to fight for a world where technology is a tool for social movements fighting for justice and liberation, rather than a tool for the automation and exacerbation of tyranny, exploitation, and greed. Should I use you or should I let you do it? And,
Solid, and I am Dr. Joy Buolamwini, also known as the Poet of Code. I tell stories that make daughters of diasporas dream and sons of privilege pause. We can all be sons and daughters. And I will start with a poem. With safety in sight and security calling, would you turn back for the forgotten ones? Would you risk your comfort or diminish your power to reach out to those left in the shadows? Would your lips testify of uncanny truths, or instead would you swallow your conscience and cough up excuses. I diverted my eyes because I was afraid that I would see myself in the shadows. And yes, she was there. Her name was potential. Her crime was hope. She lived in a city that promised equality, yet did not know the meaning of equity. Prestige and privilege masquerade as merit, though much of what is achieved is a function of what we inherit.
That's the poet of code, everyone. So I'm honored to be playing a little bit of the role of host here. And the three folks here could go on for hours and hours on this topic, but we have about 45 minutes. And so I'm going to try to kind of move us through this and throw some provocative questions to my esteemed guests here. And it's important that we start by noting that this event is part of the launch of the paperback edition of Dr. Joy Buolamwini's new book. Or it's not new in the sense that I read it a few months ago, but it is new in this paperback lightweight form that you can pack on a trip with you. On that trip, you should opt out of the TSA's facial recognition and join the opt-out club organized by AJL. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But Dr. Buolamwini, your book is called Unmasking AI. It's a phenomenal book. If folks haven't read it, I highly recommend the audiobook version because you get to listen to Dr. Joy read it herself, and chef's kiss. So great. There's so much in this book to unpack, but I think it's actually great to start with like the story. There's a story at the beginning of this book. It's not just like technology and blah, blah, blah algorithms. You start with like a ghost story, perhaps. Tell us your ghost story, Dr. Joy, about how this all began.
Yes, many, many moons ago, and Halloween 2015, I came over to the MIT Media Lab. I was a grad student, really eager to just be part of the Future Factory. And I started working on a project called the Aspire Mirror. And the idea was to look into a mirror and become something I dreamed of, or somebody I admired, like Serena Williams or a lioness. And so instead of having, let's say, a video filter you might have on Snapchat at the time, I know I'm dating myself, you could have it come through an actual mirror using half glass, silvered glass. And so I got this to work and I thought, wouldn't it be cool if this image could follow me in the mirror? So I got a webcam, downloaded some face detection software, and this is where things go sideways. So as I'm programming this Aspire Mirror to detect my face just for this whimsical, fun idea, it's actually not detecting my face consistently. And so I first draw a face on my hand, and it detects the face I drew on my hand. So after that, I thought anything is up for grabs. And I happened to have a white mask in my office because it was Halloween time. A friend had asked me to do a girls' night out. She said, bring mask. She meant Korean beauty mask. I did not get that reference. And so I went and I actually got a literal white mask. So it was in my office just in time for me to reach for it after I'd drawn the face on my hand. And before I even got it all the way over my face, the white mask was detected and my dark skin wasn't. And that's really that moment that led to Unmasking AI and asking questions, are machines as neutral as they seem? And so for me, this was my first encounter with what I call the coded gaze. Now, show of hands, how many have heard of the male gaze? The white gaze? The post-colonial gaze? Okay, you get the point. So this is a cousin concept, and it's really a reflection about power. Who holds the power to shape the preferences, priorities, and at times prejudices that are embedded into coded systems? And so that's how this journey for the Algorithmic Justice League got started, through creativity and exploration and curiosity.
The coded gaze. It seems really important, and Amanda, I'm going to come to you in just a second, but Dr. Joy, I think you mentioned who has the power, right? And when we talk about this coded gaze, it does seem important who's doing the gazing, right? And so it does feel crucial to situate this conversation in the moment that we're in, where we have an incoming administration that has been very explicit about their intention to use technology as a weapon rather than a tool to go after certain communities, particularly engaging in mass deportations of migrant communities, particularly in ramping up the over-policing of communities of color that we know has already been built up under both Democratic and Republican administrations over the years. But it does seem unique that this administration wants to see us all in a particular way. Can you speak just very briefly about what it means to have the coded gaze held by an institution or a growing set of institutions that have explicitly fascist or white supremacist goals?
This actually reminds me of a passage I wrote in Unmasking AI when I was reflecting on the 2016 election. So if you have the book and you turn to page 32, you can follow along. On November 9th, 2016, several days after the art show, Donald Trump was elected President of the United States. While some of my childhood friends in Memphis, Tennessee celebrated, in the streets of Cambridge, there was palpable disappointment. Our group, which had been a curiosity in the Future Factory, aka Media Lab, was now a destination point. People from other lab groups began to make pilgrimages to our Wednesday afternoon meetings, which were generally open to anyone. These visitors were galvanized to think about the role of their technology in today's society, and they came to see what they could learn from our work. I helped pull out more and more folding chairs to hold people who joined us. It was actually kind of like this, right? At our gatherings, students working on new user interfaces, gene editing tools, and unique musical instruments dropped in. There was an undercurrent murmuring. What is the value of the work I'm doing now? How can we use the power we have in places like Harvard, MIT, or elsewhere, Boston, Cambridge, to change society? We were gathering to have a space to voice our fears and our hopes. Ethan, my supervisor at the time, modeled for me what it looked like to hold space for others, no matter where they were on their journey of political awareness, to come and be heard, to ask questions, to express doubts, and to find community like we're doing here today. In an age of rising populism, how could I amplify issues I was seeing with AI, which was now increasingly in the hands of a government that was quickly losing my trust? And so getting to your question, Evan, at the moment, when I started looking at facial recognition technologies, it became very clear that these were surveillance technologies. And when you're thinking about facial recognition, these are covert surveillance technologies, right? And so with other biometrics, like say your fingerprint, it had to be cooperative. You generally know you've been fingerprinted. With your face, in the book, I talk about stores that have mannequins with cameras in their eyes, right? Billboards that are literally watching you. And you might say, well, my phone is tracking me. You can leave your phone at home. It's a little harder to leave your face at home, right? If you lose your password or combination, you can change that. Facial reconstruction surgery is a little bit harder as well. And so when I first started looking at these technologies, I was often asked, oh, why don't you make them better, right? Let's improve the data sets and all of these things. But I was really concerned then because remember, the Algorithmic Justice League is being started in 2016 in a moment somewhat similar to this, and thinking not just how can we make these tools accurate, but how can these tools be abused, even if they are more precise. And it reminds me actually of another poem I wrote, which is called, I have a lot of poetry if you guys don't mind. Yeah, this one is called Precisely Who Will Die. It's a somber tone. But I think it gets to some of the concerns for what you were laying out. Give me 1 second. Precisely who will die? Some say AI is an existential risk. We see AI as an exterminating reality, accelerating annihilation, augmenting destruction. I heard of a new gospel delivering death with the promise of precision, the code name for an old aim to target your enemy, the other reduced to rubble. Face erased, name displaced, as the drones carry on in a formation that spells last shadow. AI wars first fought at the doors of our neighbors. Next, the bombs drop on your private chambers. Cease to believe fire on fire will deliver peace. Precisely who will die, zeroed out by ones and guns. So when I'm thinking about AI, when I'm thinking about surveillance, when I'm thinking about authoritarian governments and so forth, it is a matter of life and death, oftentimes. Yeah.
Word. And I think that's a really important piece to highlight. Dr. Buolamwini, your research, you're literally one of the people that helped show mathematically that many current facial recognition systems exhibit systemic racial and gender bias. And what we recognize increasingly and what so many of folks in the human rights community are building toward is the analysis that these technologies are harmful and discriminatory when they have bias baked into them, and they can still be harmful and discriminatory even as that bias is reduced if they're used in harmful and discriminatory ways. So there is consensus within the human rights community that facial recognition surveillance, for example, is incompatible with basic human rights. Even if the technology does become incredibly accurate, if it's being used for policing and layered on top of a system that's already deeply unjust, it's only going to automate and exacerbate that injustice. We've heard some poetry. We have heard about the moment that we're in. I want to say just a couple words about Amanda Palmer. She introduced herself, but for anyone who isn't deeply familiar with her work, you should know that she is the singer of the legendary punk cabaret band, the Dresden Dolls. She's also written quite a bit about these topics. And Amanda, I feel like you're also like a practitioner of the internet in many ways. And like it is a little bit interwoven with like your work and who you are. And you've found ways to use these powerful but deeply imperfect tools to find a way to support yourself, to be able to define your own art without having to perhaps rely on the traditional music industry, publishing industry, these gatekeepers that have for so long gotten to define what we hear, what we see, what art gets made, what art gets consumed. And we're in like a kind of weird moment around that right now, right? Talk to us about how you view that evolution of like coming from this world of like a little bit of like techno-optimism, like, yeah, like this is great, like bring it on, into this moment that we're in where it feels like there are these diverging paths. And how do we choose what to go down? And what is the role of the artist in helping us decipher which of these paths we need to take?
That's an amazing question. Beautifully worded. Well, I think I need to be careful because I feel like I could talk for half an hour, and I want to not just, because this could just keep going, and it touches so many topics. I announced this morning to Twitter, X, Twitter thing, that I was leaving the platform. I've been thinking about it, but it's not like I sit down with my major label that doesn't exist and my fancy think tank technology team that doesn't exist. I'm still just like a musician with a phone. Mm-hmm. And I woke up this morning and I was like, you know what? Fuck everything. I think I'm gonna it's on my mind. I've been kind of meaning to do this. Twitter has just been getting worse and worse and deader and more frightening. And the more and more I learn about Elon Musk, I feel more and more complicit. And I just started doing what I often start doing, and I'm sure we start doing, which is I just started composing a tweet. And then another one, and then it turned into a long thread. And even as I was writing it, I was like, maybe I won't post this. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. And I didn't send it to anyone or run it by anyone or even check for typos. There's probably some typos in it. And I just published it. And it probably took me about 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, to put this thread together. And I think it speaks volumes about the state of Twitter. I have 1 million followers. And I checked back in half an hour, and it had about 6 or 7 responses. And it made me, first of all, like, angry that I didn't do this a year ago when I would have gotten, you know, more applause for being so awesome, for leaving the platform early. But also, what was interesting, and what I was just thinking while you were talking about this, was the experience of sitting there in my house, kind of closing my eyes and thinking, like, what happened? Like, what the fuck was that?
Sorry, WGBH.
Sorry, WGBH. We're good.
Late night.
I Twitter in 2007. I was still living in Boston then. And it was like I sort of closed my eyes and walked down all of the hallways of that museum. And it's not a physical place. There's going to be no documentation of everything and almost anything that really happened there. And I actually found it disorienting and a little scary, going like, okay, so what was Twitter? What happened to us? What happened to my friends? Well, alone in a hotel room in Belgium because I had a layover, and I tweeted like, I'm in this random town. I've wanted to learn how to play chess. Does anyone just want to come by with a bottle of wine and a chessboard? And this guy showed up an hour later and was like, I'm your guy. I have chess set. And there was like the time I tweeted together hundreds of people here and there and there. And there was the time that I was in a house right here that I just drove by, living in Harvard Square when the Boston Marathon bombing happened. And I remember sitting right there at that table, and for the first time ever on the internet, I couldn't read it fast enough. I couldn't read my feed fast enough. It was like going like this. And I wrote a little bit about it on Twitter, but there's a guilt and a big wondering that I have about what it meant to sort of be there in 2000 as the internet was just starting to be this incredible tool for artists and musicians. And I had a blog, and we had friends at MIT who built the Dresden Dolls' first website. We were definitely in the right community to be a band on the internet. And I dragged everyone over to MySpace, and I dragged everyone over to LiveJournal, and then I dragged everyone over to Twitter, and all of a sudden, no one was reading blogs anymore. Everyone was just reading Facebook posts and tweets and now Instagram posts. And I think the thing that makes us good musicians or poets or artists is like, we just don't care. We're very slutty, right? We'll just go where the people are. Like, we want to go where the people are. Like, we figure it's some adult's job to figure out the grown-up stuff, the code, the laws, the guardrails. And our job is to throw the party and have the feelings and bring some profundity to the moment. But the architecture isn't our job. That's like the grown-ups. And I get chills when I think about that right now, when I think about the fact that artists have really driven so much, or maybe directed so much of the traffic, how we use the internet, where we've gathered, what we accept as normal. And at no point did all of the musicians and the artists and the poets get together and say, we have all this power. We should have a meeting with the people who are designing and running this stuff to make sure that it's going to work out for everybody before we start dragging our communities over this way and over that way. It never occurred to us to think that way. And now, leaving Twitter I feel grief. for all of the beautiful things that happened there, the people I met, the friends I made, the deaths that happened, the mourning, the parties, the moments. And I know something else will come to replace it, probably, but I feel very frightened about our lack of understanding of our responsibility. And with the new administration coming in, I really, for the first time, and I mean, this also speaks to my incredible privilege as a white girl from Lexington, right? Have found myself hesitating when I'm typing something into a phone, because I do know I am being watched, but I've always known I'm being watched. But for the first time, I'm afraid that my opinion, my persona, my abortion introduction, my thoughts about Donald Trump, Elon Musk, might actually, I mean, it's just so easy to find this stuff at this point, and the AI can just come right through and scrape everything. And I just assumed that as my career rolled on and on, I would feel more and more empowered and braver and more like sitting in my seat of amazingness as I turn into, like from a baby rock star into an old crone. And it frightens me. Yeah. I'm frightened at the moment. The technology that I used to just go like, wee, let's have a party on Kickstarter, the internet, and Twitter. I find myself feeling a level of fear, worry, and anxiety about the internet that I never could have imagined.
I feel it. I feel that fear and that questioning of where, I think you said it in our text, like, where do we hang out online these days? Yeah. Dr. Joy, in your book, you speak not just of the coded gaze, but of the excoded. Can you just quickly define that term for us, and then I'm going to ask you a question about it.
Sure. I like terms. We got the coded gaze. Now we're going to the excoded. So people who have been condemned, convicted, exploited, exhausted, otherwise targeted or harmed by AI systems. So the excoded can be people like Portia Woodruff, who was 8 months pregnant when she was falsely arrested due to AI-fueled facial recognition, detained, actually reported having contractions while she was being held, and it put her and her to-be-born child, at risk. I think of the coded gaze when I think about lethal autonomous weapons. So facial recognition, a drone and a gun being accurate isn't just the only question here, right? I think about the excoded with students who might be flagged as cheating because English is their second language, and now you're trying to use AI to combat AI to determine if you're cheating or not. I think about the excoded when it comes to health, people who are denied kidney transplants because of race-based corrections that were put in place so people of color wouldn't have access to life-saving operations. And so I also think of the excoded when I think about Taylor Swift or Tom Hanks deepfakes, their images being exploited. And as I've gone on this journey of starting the Algorithmic Justice League, exploring algorithmic bias and so forth, I've seen that no one is immune to being excoded.
Even Amanda effing Palmer on Twitter, right?
And people are feeling it now.
Algorithmic suppression, because we don't own these platforms that we've built our homes on. We're paying rent to landlords, and sometimes you have an okay landlord who's like pretty chill for a while and like actually shows up and fixes the sink when you ask and like doesn't care, like if you throw a cool party in the backyard, and sometimes you have Elon Musk. But until we own and control these digital public squares that we're trying to gather in, we will always be at the whim of those that see us through this coded gaze and who, often are manipulating things behind the scenes toward their own ends, even while claiming this mantle of platforms for speech that are, in fact, often platforms for surveillance where like speech is sort of like a byproduct, right? On this point, like talking about artists specifically being among the excoded, there's been a big explosion of conversation around this with the advent of generative AI, probably best encapsulated by, or at least popularized by, ChatGPT. And I will admit that for myself, like, I found it a little annoying, and maybe some other folks here who we're like, man, we've been working on AI since before it was cool, and now suddenly everyone wants to talk about it. But hey, that's actually good, right? Because this is something that affects all of us. These are not problems that are going to be solved by brilliant researchers, by rock stars, by nonprofit organizations. They're problems that are collective across our society and that we will all have to solve together. And artists and musicians and poets and authors have always been like part of that vanguard, creating that kind of drumbeat that social movements often need. But we also now recognize that we're in a moment where like it's getting harder and harder to tell what art and culture is even created by a human, how different types of algorithmic recommendations impact what art we see. I played my song Surveillance Capitalism earlier for folks that came in, and we released that with a music video and a campaign targeting Spotify, who had patented a technology to use voice recognition biometric software to listen to your conversations and then use your conversations to recommend you music based on things that they thought about you. So like you're speaking Spanish, you probably want to listen to Bad Bunny. You're like the most basic, like discriminatory ways of breaking people into categories based on what they say, and then using that to recommend them music. Amanda, what does it mean if we're heading for a world where musicians are, and we did a whole panel about this together at Berkman Klein Center, but let's condense that whole panel into a 1.5-minute response so we can get back to Joy. What does it mean if we head into a future where humans are making music to please an algorithm, because that's how you make money these days, rather than doing what we've done for thousands of years of making music and art and culture for each other?
Well, one of the things that I am happy to be experiencing now that I'm back in Cambridge and I'm hanging out with a totally different set of people than I was in upstate New York, where there's very little academia. In Woodstock, New York, there's none. And I thought I knew what was happening. I thought I knew where people's opinions were probably falling on this in regards to AI and art and music. And I've actually been sort of shocked at how divisive it is here. And it doesn't fall really along party lines the way I thought it would. And I feel very old-fashioned, I think many artists do, in terms of, and maybe it's because I'm a songwriter, and maybe it's because I'm not a pop songwriter. And I look at the artists who really embrace AI right now. I don't know, Brian Eno, Bjork, Grimes. Sorry, is anyone else, can you think of any like super AI embracing artist at the moment? Lupe Fiasco. Sorry? Laurie Anderson. Like a hero of mine. And I mean, the way you have to look at any technology, especially as it applies to art, is like, is it a useful tool? And is it going to ruin anything? And I think, I mean, when we did our talk the other day, we left with more questions than answers, and I think that's probably likely tonight too. And if we accomplish anything here tonight, it will just be some kind of like relieving acknowledgement that everyone's confused and that we're not heading towards some obvious specific answer with this little checklist of goals. I can tell you a story of something that happened that's actually like related and maybe a little apt. So I, as a person who posts things on the internet, am used to getting punished. Because if you post anything and you have enough followers, you're gonna fuck up and you're going to get called out and you're gonna make people angry and you're gonna hopefully start conversations and know how to hold them, and it's part of your job. So on Trans Awareness Day last spring, it fell on Easter. And someone in a WhatsApp chat texted me this great image. It was like very bright and colorful, and it was an image of Jesus at the Last Supper, the painting. But Jesus was a drag queen and was surrounded by all of these drag queen apostles. And it was hilarious. I thought it was hilarious. And I just did what I often do, which is I screen capped it and I put it up on Instagram and was like, Happy Easter and Trans Awareness Day. And look, here's a drag queen Jesus, got to go to a show, bye. Woo. And then logged into Instagram, an hour later to find that it had blown up in a bad way, but not in the way that I would have expected, because it wasn't that the Christian right was after me, telling me that I was terrible. It was because the image was AI generated, which was obvious when you actually looked at the fact that a lot of queens had 6 or 7 fingers in each hand. And it was not the first time that I had posted something that was sort of AI generated and people had gone hey, don't do that. And I was like, well, wait, is that what we're doing? Are we not doing that? I guess so. Well, I guess that makes sense in everything I've learned about AI. Okay, so I engaged in a conversation with a few people, and I thought I could delete this, but that feels cowardly, and it also deletes the entire conversation beneath it. I'm being asked to delete it. I'm being asked to apologize. I'm being asked to explain. I'm being asked to it turned into a kind of an unsolvable problem. And so I decided to solve the problem by hiring, with my Patreon money, a trans painter from Northern Ireland to actually, from her own imagination and using other source material, not just copying the painting, just make the painting. And it took her 3 months, and I'm putting it out tomorrow. And I was and if you follow my Patreon, you'll see it. And it's a painting, it's a cool painting. We asked 13 different drag queens if we could use their likenesses. I was I'm not gonna get into trouble again, just stealing some drag queens from the internet. And I'm really interested to see where that conversation goes, because it leads to a really interesting question, which is, if we can't put it back in the bottle, can we use it as a tool? Can we put on guardrails? And I mean, this is the question I would ask Joy, is you have this technology that's kind of fundamentally shitty. And people ask you, well, improve it. And the question for art is, are we able and allowed to take this really powerful, very obviously potentially shitty tool, and can we still use it, and can we still bop around and kind of the pinball machine of AI and not completely just put our blinders on? Is it allowed to inspire? And I actually don't have an answer to that question. I'm not going to take to my post tomorrow and say I figured this out. I feel like my job as an artist is I don't have to fucking answer that question. My job as the artist is to just go well, isn't this interesting? So I'm going to put this here, and I'm going to put this here, and I'm going to stand back, and I'm going to see what you say, because that's my job. The smart academic MIT people can give us the answer at the end of the day.
All right, smart academic MIT person.
I see them all over here, and Harvard people too. It'd be great to hear audience reactions to this as well. When you were telling that story, it actually reminded me of Dr. Ruha Benjamin, who is the author of Race After Technology and many other books, and she authored a book named Imagination. And she actually worked with a Black woman who is an AI artist to produce the cover. And like you encountered, there was blowback. The internet can be punishing. And so the blowback was, well, Dr. Benjamin, given all you've written about race after technology, how could you post your next book with an AI image cover? She reaches back, yo, I'm working with a Black woman who's an artist. Yes, but she's using tools that were created using the stolen work of others. So it doesn't matter that her identity, right, is aligned with you in some way because the process itself isn't. And so similar to what you did, she commissioned a cover, right? And so she commissioned a cover, worked with, and I think she got her niece on there somehow. Anyways, humans benefited, and there's a different cover with it. I was laughing when you were talking about hands because there's a specific reason I have hands on the cover of the book. Covers are hard. It took 14 tries to get this cover. None of the ones that were sent to me I liked, so I slid into the DMs of Malika Favre, who's an amazing illustrator. She's done a lot of the New Yorker ones. And I just did a last-minute plea last August. She had 7 days, came up with all of these options. We got this cover. But I really wanted there to be hands on this cover in this particular moment where we knew certain AI-generated systems were struggling with hands. I got sidetracked, though. There was another piece to this.
Well, I don't know that you're all that sidetracked, but I was going to ask you to talk more, getting into kind of the nitty-gritty of this. So Amanda talked about these conundrums and, like, whose job is it to figure this out? You founded an organization called the Algorithmic Justice League. Your organization works closely with my organization, Fight for the Future, with a broad coalition of racial justice, human rights, free expression, press freedom, reproductive rights, immigrants' rights, all kinds of different organizations working to fight for people and our basic rights. Talk to us about AJL, the Algorithmic Justice League. What does it do? And what is some of the work that AJL is doing on this specific question of creative control and consent as it relates to art and AI?
Got it. So Algorithmic Justice League was my response after that experience of coding in a white mask to say, wait, shouldn't we have an organization with not just academics, maybe some artists, maybe some activists, maybe some action heroes out here actually fighting to prevent AI harms. And at the time we started in 2016, a lot of people didn't even know what we were talking about when we were saying AI, yet alone AI harms. And so a big part of our work was just raising awareness with films like Coded Bias on Netflix. Later on, the book comes out. Poems like AI Ain't I Woman, Can Machines Ever See My Queens as I View Them? Can Machines Ever See Our Grandmothers as We Knew Them? Always bringing the art back into what we were doing, coupled with research on algorithmic audits showing racial bias, gender bias from the Amazons, the IBMs, the Microsoft of the world, saying if it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. So that was a big part of the early work. As people got more familiar with AI systems, and also as AI systems are being more adopted, we wanted to really say, how do we connect the excoded to resources? And so we created the excoded platform. And so as we were looking at the landscape, there was really nowhere you go if you've been hurt by AI systems. Like, where do you go? Who do you talk to? Who do you call? We're saying you call AJL, right? And so after there's awareness, there's also getting people support. And then finally, there's the advocacy, which gets to changing practices. And whether it's industry practice, so having IBM, having Microsoft, having Amazon all stop selling facial recognition to law enforcement. That was in part because of so much of the research we put out there, and sister organizations like Fight for the Future, sibling organizations, are really pushing for differences. Things we do now is how do we engage everybody else in this fight for algorithmic justice. So going back to creativity, one of the campaigns we did this year was the 4Cs campaigns for creative rights. So thinking about control and credit, compensation, as well. I always forget the 4C. It's in there somewhere.
Consent, maybe.
Consent, that big one, the big one, consent. And so in doing so, a big part of what we're pushing for are alternative AI systems. And I think it's funny, earlier you were talking about ChatGPT as AI, because AI can mean so many different things, and we have a very narrow definition of spicy autocomplete as AI. And there's just so much more to that. And so what I try to get into the book is to say, this is only one person's imagination or one way of doing it. It doesn't have to be this way. Even when you were talking about the drag queens, we did this whole thing called Drag versus AI, where I built an app. You can go to surface.ajl.org and play with it right now, where you could see how different AI systems would read your face. And then we would have different chambers, the invisibility chamber, see if you could not be seen, the drag chamber, mess with your age, the infinity mess with your age, drag mess with your gender, and so forth. But this was literally building an AI tool myself. Right? And I think it's so easy, just like what you were saying with Twitter, where you're camping on somebody else's yard and they control the parameters, that we forget we can actually build alternatives. In the book, I talk about deep data deletion. What would it look like if we started over? What would it look like if we started over and we didn't build on a foundation of stolen data that was then curated by, people in Kenya being paid less than 2 hours, having to deal with PTSD for looking at some of the worst images you can imagine to filter those data sets before you even get to the generative AI system. And we don't just stop with deleting the data. What does it look like to actually change the products that were built on those data sets in the first place? And as you go down this chain, there's a lot of money involved, hundreds of millions of dollars involved. And because of that, that's why people say you can't do it, but it's technically possible. Is the political will there? That's going to be up to us to actually push for ethical AI alternatives. Right now, they say if you put a prompt into ChatGPT, it's like pouring out 8 cups of water, right? Because these technologies are so energy intensive with the way they've been created. This isn't the only architecture that exists. This is the one that has a lot of money behind it right now, so people are pushing down that particular pathway. But it's before we had generative AI doing these sorts of things, we had GANs, generative adversarial networks. You just keep seeing evolutions. And so there's such a fixation on this particular flavor of AI that's actually not going to last very long. And we're already starting to see some of the gains plateauing. And so I think it's up to us to make sure that we explode the imagination space of what AI looks like, which isn't just this prompt in a box in ChatGPT.
Yes. I love bringing imagination into this, and I always, in almost every conversation, I feel like all of my work is heavily informed by the writing of predominantly Black women academics, and particularly folks that have focused on police and prison abolition. And I think that they can teach us a lot when we think about technologies. Angela Davis talks so eloquently about imagination and how often what holds us back is a deficit of imagination. We are unable to imagine a different way of organizing society. And I think that that really speaks to me when we think about things like generative AI and how we deal with it. The US Congress right now is looking at generative AI systems and sort of being like, well, this kind of looks like a set of nails and we have some hammers, like we should start hitting them. And many of the ways that they've talked about responding are by doubling down on our existing broken and unjust copyright system, which has largely failed to benefit particularly marginalized artists and creators throughout history. And ignores some of the ways that, for example, if we try to use copyright and cut down on fair use as a response to generative AI, we could actually end up in a world where when you sign your book deal, your publisher just has a little box that you check, and then you're licensing your publisher's right to let robots read your work and generate new work out of it.
I had biometric clauses for the audio, but
Not Dr. Joy. You're not going to get that one past Dr. Joy. But not everyone is as well informed. And I fear for that. I fear for a world where musicians, all of our music goes up on Spotify and we can get like 0.13000001 extra cents if we also let someone train their AI on it. And that also leads to a world where these AI systems are likely to be dominated by a small handful of corporations, rather than opening up our imaginative potential for open source systems, for decentralized, community-controlled systems that have those 4 C's of consent, of control, of cooperation. That probably wasn't one of them. And credit. So anyhow, that's just my little soapbox spiel. I put my moderator hat back on now. But I'll also just quickly say, when we think about that sense of imagination, it's been said a couple times in this conversation. People will talk about, like, you can't put the toothpaste, I can talk, back in the tube. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Like, that's just wrong, y'all. Like, we used to use lead paint in every new construction in this country. And, you can literally go back and find, like, New York Times articles that are like, yeah, lead paint might be dangerous, but, like, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. We put that toothpaste back in the tube. We passed laws and regulations, and we no longer use lead paint in new construction anywhere in this country. And in fact, we've, like, spent tremendous amounts of time and money and energy getting lead paint out of our buildings because lead paint hurts kids. Algorithmic injustice hurts kids and adults and our communities. And, like, we get to decide as a human civilization what technologies we build and what the rules governing them are. Dr. Joy and I wrote a little jingle for the Federal Trade Commission when as one does. It may or may not have been a Christmas song. I'll let you go find that on the internet if it still exists. But we did it when the Federal Trade Commission fined Rite Aid and demanded that they delete the data set behind the facial recognition system that they were using. They put that toothpaste back in that tube, right at Rite Aid. So I think it's just, these are the things that should give us hope in this moment. Working with organizations like AJL, Fight for the Future, has run campaigns that got more than 60 of the world's largest music festivals to commit to not using facial recognition at their events, to dozens of colleges and universities to commit to not using facial recognition at their events, to large name brand companies to commit to not using facial recognition. That's not a replacement for law and policy, but that slows things down and gives us time to do the work of organizing toward being able to envision, to get our imaginations, as Angela Davis calls us to that point of, like, imagining what do we want technology to be for? Who do we want it to be for? Who gets to decide? And I think Algorithmic Justice League has done so much work on that issue of, like, who gets to decide, who is most impacted. Amanda, like, your work and your music speak to these issues all the time of, like, who is the artist in this? What is our voice? What is our role? What's our responsibility? I want to hand it back to you for just a few more minutes, and I'm going to give a time check. We're at 7:50, so we're about to get into questions, but, like, 30 seconds from Amanda, 30 seconds from Dr. Joy. Take us out with, this provocation. Like, what do we leave people with? How do we give people hope in this moment? Where do we need to go from here? And Dr. Joy, for you specifically, what does it mean to be a poet of code at a time when we need poetry and we need code to be just?
I can't remember if we did this at Berkman, but I just pulled up the incredible piece of writing that Nick Cave did on his website, the Red Hand Files, when asked how he felt about a Nick Cave Chat GPT song that was sent. And I just want to read from this, and then I'll say something quick, but he says, it may sound like I'm taking this all a little too personally. I mean, he begins the answer by saying, I think the song is a shitty song. It may sound like I'm taking all of this a little too personally, but I'm a songwriter who is engaged at this very moment in the process of songwriting. It's a blood and guts business here at my desk that requires something of me to initiate the new and fresh idea, It requires my humanness. What that new idea is, I don't know, but it is out there somewhere searching for me, and in time we will find each other. Mark, thanks for the song, but with all the love and respect in the world, this song is bullshit. A grotesque mockery of what it is to be human, and well, I don't much like it. Although, hang on, rereading it, there's a line in the song, in the Nick Cave ChatGPT song, that speaks to me. I've got the fire of hell in my eyes, says the song in the style of Nick Cave. And that's kind of true. I have got the fire of hell in my eyes, and it's ChatGPT. But I've come back to this piece again and again, and one of the things that I find myself thinking that gives me a lot of hope is I still write songs all the time, and I feel this like fiery competition with the robots. That like when I play a song like in my mind, or Ukulele Anthem, or Voicemail for Jill, which is the song I wrote about abortion, I'm like, it goes so many weird and wild places, and I don't know how my brain did that. I don't know where the songs come from. I don't know what is going on when I piece together a song. It is some kind of magical alchemy. But I know I can do it, and the robot can't. Because every piece of AI art I have seen looks and smells and feels a little bit like bullshit. And it is for the same reason that anyone looking at that trans Awareness Day drag Jesus thing was just like, well, clearly it's AI. I do fear a little bit for like when the singularity comes and like, the robots, get better and better and better and better. But I have this optimism that we're so into being people. And we're so into human art, and we're so into the gorgeous, imperfect poem that spills out, and that we actually really want it that way, and that all of this will draw us into a kind of a delicious appreciation that we didn't have for the artistic impulse and the artistic process and the poet and the song and the conversation and the party and the off-internet, the stuff that we can only hold in a kind of appreciation when we watch it getting snatched away from us. And I think it's things like this, it's gatherings like this, it's going to punk shows, it's writing poetry, it's picking up an instrument, it's talking to a stranger. And these things right now, at this moment in time, feel like shakes of fist to a system where they just wouldn't have before. That like the natural, the organic, the human is going to start to feel different in a way that is positive.
Yeah, snaps, claps, mic drops, all the good things. To your question, what does it mean to be a poet of code? It took me a while to really let the artist within take center stage, because I spent so much time getting my technical chops, 4 academic degrees, 2 honoraries, all this armor, right? All this armor in a world that says somebody like me shouldn't sit in the seat of expertise. Somebody like me shouldn't have the opportunities that I've had. And so in some ways, I was afraid that if I shared my poetry, if I shared the art, the technical work that I had done wouldn't be seen or valued as much. And I decided to go for it anyways, because by the time I got to MIT and I was working on my 4th degree, I was like, okay, I can play the academic game. I can do that. I want to challenge myself. What would it look like to create a poetic PhD? And it was in that exploration that the notion of the evocative audit came. And so with the work of Gender Shades, that showed the largest gender biases, skin type biases ever recorded from commercial AI systems. I wanted to move from performance metrics to performance arts, to say, what does it actually mean for people to feel algorithmic bias? or AI harms. And so that's where you get to something like, my heart smiles as I bask in their legacies, knowing their lives have altered many destinies. In her eyes, I see my mother's poise. In her face, I glimpse my auntie's grace. In this case of deja vu, a 19th century question comes into view. In a time when Sojourner Truth asked, ain't I a woman? And so it goes. And so for me, being a poet of code was my own challenge to honor the artist within. And I remember being in Brussels, Belgium, and sharing AI Ain't I Woman to the EU Global Tech panel. And that later went on to be shown to EU defense ministers ahead of conversations about lethal autonomous weapons. And it was Black women in the frame, right? You had Sojourner Truth, you had Ida B. Wells, you had Shirley Chisholm, you had Serena Williams, all of these Black women showing the fallibility of these so-called sophisticated AI systems. And in that moment, I saw how important the poetry was to this work, and I saw how important it would be to the Algorithmic Justice League, that we do both institutional power and narrative power, that it's about both research and storytelling. And so that was the motivation of stepping into POC, people of color, poet of code, all of that. And so I will end with the poem I end the book with, which is called Unstable Desire. Page 289 for all of these people with books, I see. Unstable desire. Prompted to competition, where be the guardrails now? Threat in sight, will might make right? Hallucinations taken as prophecy. Destabilized on a middling journey to outpace, to open chase, to claim supremacy, to reign indefinitely. Haste and paste, control altering deletion. Unstable desire remains undefeated. The fate of AI still uncompleted. Responding with fear, responsible AI beware. Prophets do snare and people still dare to believe our humanity is more than neural nets and transformations of collected muses, more than data and errata, more than transactional diffusions. Are we not transcendent beings bound in transient forms? Can this power be guided with care, augmenting delight alongside economic destitution? Temporary band-aids cannot hold the wind when the task ahead is to transform the atmosphere of innovation. The android dreams entice, the nightmare schemes of vice. Poet of code, certified human-made.
Yeah.
Give it up for the poet of code, Dr. Joy Buolamwini. Give it up for Amanda Palmer.
Give it up for Evan.